Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and we are looking at Dhalsim, Pliable Pacifist. This deck comes to us from Lexa, who has been so gracious to support the channel to bring this deck and the next deck up to the front of the queue. Thank you, Lexa, so much for always supporting the channel, and if you ever feel that, I've missed one of these decks, which happened because I haven't been receiving the notifications, don't feel bad about dropping a comment on one of the videos and checking in, because I would rather, you get the video that you wanted. So let's read Lexa's message. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. They say, this is a Reach Tribal deck that is looking to use its commander to be evasive and gain card advantage. I'm slightly worried about the long tail the curve has and if everything is worth it. This is definitely something we can look at. And I do really, I don't like Universe Beyond. I'm one of those people that kind of doesn't want other IPs in Magic, but I really do like the design space of Universe Beyond. I think we've been seeing a lot of really, really cool cards that you wouldn't see otherwise be printed and be accessible. So if you do see me play this card, you'd probably see me playing the Universe Within version, but I do really, really like the design space, where we've been getting some cool cards, some cool commanders, and I'm looking forward to the, more things they put out this way. All right, so let's take a look at Dhalsim and see what they provide to us as a Reach commander. Dhalsim is a 4-mana, 1/3 human monk in Selesnya colors, that's green-white. They have Reach, and then they have 3 additional abilities. The first ability is that he has Hexproof unless he's attacking. Then he says, whenever a creature with Reach attacks, untap it, and it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power this combat. And then finally it says, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So that's actually quite a few abilities, and I am rather impressed by him as a legendary creature. He just does a lot. The fact that he has Reach is not free. It does do something, right? Like it does allow certain blocks to happen, especially if you grow his power and toughness. The fact that he has Hexproof when he's not attacking, that one doesn't pique my interest as much. I'll come back to that in a second because I think that can be used for something else. And then he's got his Reach setup where Reach creatures become pseudo unblockable as long as their power is low enough. I think basically they have Skulk, right? And they untap, which is also interesting. And then finally, they have that, I can't remember the name of that Spy Master. I think his name starts with an E, but he's got the ability that like Timna and a bunch of other really, really strong creatures, commanders have, where now your creatures that deal damage to a player, for each player you damage, you draw a card, which is really, really a strong card, a strong ability. And when we, tie it in with the fact that we give evasion to our Reach creatures, I think it is rather, rather good. Now, I will say, Dhalsim has I think 2 kinds of builds that you can make out of him. I think we've got one here, which is the Reach Tribal, where we look at the fact that he has Reach and the fact that he gives creatures with Reach unblockable as the biggest parts of that. But I would suggest there's probably a second build you can do where you're more interested in that Fierce Punch ability, which basically allows you to draw cards as your creatures make contact. And if you look at this and you compare it to someone like Timna, now don't get me wrong, Timna is a vastly more powerful commander, especially because of Partner, but let's just erase Partner, right? Let's just look at Dhalsim and Timna as if they only had those 2 abilities, right? And although I think, yeah, it is per player for Timna as well. Sorry, I was confusing her with Gix for a second. But if you compare these 2, what is the big difference? Well, Dhalsim has 1 extra mana cost. He's 4 mana instead of 3, but he's also hexproof as long as you don't attack with him. And when he himself attacks, he is unblockable, right? Basically outside of 0 power creatures. And I think that would be the other way to build this deck, where you kind of forgo reach in general, and instead you just go for the card draw element, looking for the powers of green-white. I think they're both viable strategies. I would say probably the latter is stronger on power level than the former, but that shouldn't be a concern. If you're playing Reach Tribal, you're here for a fun time, right? So we can make Reach Tribal rather like mid-tier powerful, but in the long run, I will say that Dhalsim's strongest ability is the Fierce Punch that will draw you cards. So let's see how this deck leverages these abilities. And looking at the deck, I do really like it. Like many other tribal decks, usually, I'm looking at this and I'm not going to suggest too many reach creatures because I already think there's a lot here. But I might pick on a few of them because I think they're not all equal. This is a lot of things I really, really like in commander decks. We've got a lot of really nice ramp. We've got a selective board clear in a, what do we call it, in an aggro shell, so we can make the most of it. We have both a lot of incidental card draw, such as our commander, such as, where are they? Orhan and where is Toski? There we go. Then we also have reactive card draw, such as Esper Sentinel. But in addition, we also have one Harmonize. I bring this up a lot. I just really like the ability to have at least one card in your deck that will always guarantee to draw you cards. So I like that build. I love our instant. Arachnogenesis is really, really good here for obvious reasons. So I'm a big fan of that. And then looking around, yeah, almost universally, I like a lot of these cards. Assault Formation, of course, works really, really well here, as does any other card that deals damage through toughness, such as E Honda. These are really, really good because obviously our reach creatures are often designed to have much higher toughness than power, and so we get to deal that toughness, as damage while keeping the fact that our low power enables our creatures to be unblockable. So though a little complicated, this deck is really, it's really good. Like, the idea behind it is really strong. It dabbles in a lot of really powerful abilities. It finds a lot of interesting ways to be relevant. And all my additions are going to try to keep this variety within it, because I think there is the bones of a really, really strong deck. And maybe we'll come back to that at the end of what I would say to kind of power it up even further, but in the meantime, I do very much so like it. If we look at our curve, we can see that we have a very nice curve. 3 is the highest mana cost, which I think is fine in a deck like this. 4 is much lower, which is good because it's the same cost as our commander, but we'll take a look at that ourselves. And then we kind of go up a few more than I would like in 6. We've got 5 6 mana, actually 4, but we'll get back to that. 6 mana cards, and then we have 2 7 mana cards. So much like Lexa said, I do feel that the curve kind of trails a bit, like it goes a bit further than it should, and I will suggest at least 1 6 mana card, I'm pretty sure. So I will be adding to the curve a little bit, but I will be picky, and we'll start there, I think. We'll start there and see what we can deal with. So at 9 mana we have Dusk Dawn. Obviously that's not a 9 mana card, but it is good that it's here. Oh, let me actually go over it. It's good that it's here because I do like talking about Dusk Dawn. It is my opinion that Dusk Dawn gets a little weaker when you don't have a way to put it into your graveyard yourself. When you don't have any Entomb effects, I think it just gets a little worse because you do have to manually cast the first half. And Dawn is a really, really strong card, especially from the graveyard, obviously, which is the only place you can cast it. But the thing with Dawn is that if you cannot entomb this card, Dawn becomes a 9 mana spell. And at that point, I would say it is not the best. And with that in mind, I think I would prefer Expel the Interlopers if I can spell. One of the things I like, since I've been making the channel a little fancier and not looking up as many cards while we're making the videos, is that you don't see my bad spelling as much, but it's still there, just in case people wanted to know. So Expel the Interlopers, I think, does the thing that we want. The alternative would be Fell the Mighty. Also doing kind of what we want. So both of those, I think I want to suggest over Dusk to Dawn, just because, as I said, if we cannot put Dawn into the graveyard, it is really an unreliable spell. And for what it's worth, both Expel the Interlopers and Fell the Mighty have a little more pliability to them. With Fell the Mighty, you choose a creature, and with Expel, you choose a number. And so both of those have a higher chance of hitting the creatures you want or avoiding the creatures you don't want, because Dusk is stuck at 3 power. So it is 1 mana less, I will say, that's what it's worth, but Dusk is kind of nothing without Dawn, and Dawn is a 9 mana spell in this deck. So all that in mind, those are my opinions on that card. Okay, moving on. 7 mana. I like Titan of Industry. I think Titan of Industry is a rather good card. It does a lot more than people give it credit for. If nothing else, it puts 11 power on the field and makes your Titan of Industry have a shield counter, which I think is really, really good. Reach Trample is really good in this deck. Obviously, the Reach doesn't do much for him because it's rare to have creatures that are stronger than Titan of Industry. But it does happen, and the fact that he won't be able to be blocked, or it won't be able to be blocked by them, I think is worth considering. Overall, really do like this card. I wish we could blink it, but that's fine. It's still just rather good. On the other hand, Hatchery Spider, I just don't think really belongs here. The Undergrowth, once again, I think we really do want it in a deck that we can bury our cards, or entomb our cards into our graveyard. And as a reminder, Hatchery Spider is only green permanents. Now, I'm not saying, like, the majority of your cards are green, so the odds are high, but it is worth noting that, like, sometimes you're going to miss the things you really want, which I'm looking is nothing. So maybe it's fine, but Odric being something worth looking at, E-Honda and Boromir are all cards, and Esper Sentinel, notably, I will say Esper Sentinel, because often Esper Sentinel is something you can very much so hit off the top of your deck. Even with that one, you could flip the top card if it's Esper Sentinel. Then you can't put it. You also can't put lands, which I think is also notable. So all that to say, 7 mana for what I'm going to say is a bad Genesis Hydra is not really worth it. Because Genesis Hydra with X = 5 comes out as a 5/5. It lets you look at the top 5 and put a permanent 5 mana or less, which I think is much stronger and modular in a deck like this. That being said, I'm not going to tell you to play the Hydra. I'm just saying I think Hatchery Spider is just not up to snuff with everything else. Let's look at our 6 mana. Archon of Valor's Reach. So I never know how to feel about this card. I think it's really impressive in certain situations and just awful in others, right? What I'm going to suggest is this. Archon of Valor's Reach belongs in a clone deck, like a Bant clone deck, where you can make multiple copies of the Archon and shut off multiple of these buttons. Because I say buttons, card types, because I would suggest that if you just pick instant, you're still vulnerable to board clears. And if you pick sorcery, you're still vulnerable to targeted removal on the Archon to then cast that board clear. So I find this card is just really strong when we have multiple copies of it. If you can get the 5, I think you should Exodia win the game, but that's just my opinion. Also, I think it's worth noting it doesn't have reach. Not that that's very important, but I think it's too clunky. I don't think it belongs here. This is like I've become minded of the fact that outside of ramp decks, I don't really like six mana and higher cards that are kind of wild cards that are situationally viable or like, really good in a certain. Well, I guess that's situationally viable, but I guess fun and good in a way that doesn't jive with the rest of the deck. And I think Archon of Valor's Reach is like that. At 6 mana and up, we're not ramping. We definitely want these cards to be our finishers. And Archon of Valor's Reach is not a finisher in this deck. So I think I would cut them for sure. E Honda, who also has a Universe Within card, is fantastic. It gives you both the toughness damage and then gives you plus X to all of your creatures, unless you have more than 100, where X is plus X to toughness, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Really, really, really strong. This is your finisher, right? Compare this to the Archon, right? You play E Honda and you win the game, right? You immediately attack with a bunch of your, let's just say 5 or 6 low power reach creatures. They're all unblockable. And then E Honda's ability triggers and they all got like +7/+7. Like that's just, and not including the bonus of their toughness being higher than their power most of the time. So overall, incredibly impressed by this card. I think it's really, really rather strong. So this is the finisher that I want to see. Generous End is actually a 1 mana card. It just says forest cycling. I do like that you can actually cast this card, so I'm a big fan of it. I think that's perfect. Kodama of the East Tree, likewise, don't think it really belongs here. This belongs in a deck that kind of combos off. You're trying to draw 5 or 6 different cards. You're trying to play them and go through your entire hand every time you cast a high mana card. And you just don't really have the means to do that. Also, I do get that it has reach, but 6 mana for a 6/6 is just kind of too much if the main thing we're getting from it is reach. And once again, reach doesn't work as well in this deck when our power is that high. So I think we would cut them. And Sweet Gum Recluse is also just kind of weird. Don't get me wrong, I do rather like this card. I think it's very, very interesting. But it's just a little unwieldy in this deck. Cascade decks have to be built specifically so that you never whiff on your Cascade. And this spider is going to sometimes hit enchantments, instants, and sorceries that you don't want it to hit. And then it's also likely to hit a bunch of cards that are just not as powerful as the rest, and therefore it's going to feel kind of wasted. Yes, it does boost these creatures +3/+3 as long as it hits a creature, as long as you've played other creatures. But even then, I think there is a bit of a ceiling to this power, and the ceiling is that your deck isn't really built for Cascade. So already I would like to have that card cut, I think. All right, let's keep looking. Let's look at 5 mana. Let's see. At 5 mana and below, I think I'm generally going to be happy with the cards. Let's look at 4 mana because this is the same mana as our commander. I think Sarith doesn't really belong here. I get the idea is that as you attack with reach creatures, they are untapped, and Sarith will then give protection, give them all hexproof, which I think, I get the power there, but also worth considering, like, what is that stopping, right? That's supposed to stop instant interaction, but because the creatures don't have vigilance, there's actually a moment that they are tapped when they attack with Dhalsim's trigger on the stack. It's long enough for those instants to go through and remove the creatures. So I think with that in mind, we kind of lose the power here, and Sarith is just kind of a clunky creature instead. Toski's great. Toxicrene feels a little underused. I do appreciate it fixes your mana, but I don't think you need that. The reach, Death Touch reach is often really good, but here it's not as good. I guess they do untap, so they do form defenses as well. Okay, maybe I'm not so hard on this, but I don't love the fact that it's a 4 mana card. Who all it really does is fix your mana. It's just like a Chromatic Lantern, really. So I'm not a fan, but I'm not against it entirely, so I'll leave that one up to you. All right. Boseiju, who reaches skywards. Don't really like this. Personally, I do understand it makes a giant reach creature, but I think this is I think this is a reach. I think we can do a little better than this, especially at the same mana cost as our commander. And this is what I'm going to talk just a little bit about ramp in this deck. See, cards like Boseiju Reaches Skyward and Cultivate, their main kind of purposes as ramp is the fact that they additionally put lands into your hand. And so this is like Cultivate also puts a land on the battlefield, but one of its powers is that it's like divination. Two cards into your hand and then play a card is really, really strong. But something to consider is that the extra lands into your hand have kind of a soft cap. Let me explain what I mean. Imagine you're drawing 2 cards a turn, every turn. And let's say you draw a land every single one of those 2 cards. So 1 card is always a land. So with that in mind, you're hitting your land drop every single turn. Then you cast Cultivate. Well, you might notice that now you're going to have a land in your hand that, unless you have a way to kind of cheat it out, is always going to be in your hand, right? Now, there's an argument for thinning. I don't believe in it, but it does exist, that your deck will have less lands for you to draw into. But I think objectively the idea is that once you draw the additional land you cannot play, it will rot in your hand as long as it is the weakest land in your deck. So like with Cultivate, since it's a basic, it's likely that it is, right? So what am I getting at? I'm getting at the fact that our commander allows us to potentially draw 2 cards a turn rather easily. And though this is the idea of drawing extra lands at the beginning of the game is really nice, later in the game gets weaker and weaker. So cards like Cultivate, cards like Boseiju Reaches Skyward, aren't particularly good. Also, this isn't even counting the second saga, the second chapter that puts a land from your graveyard on top of your library, which you most likely very much so do not want to do at this point in the game. But you, I guess you can refuse to do it, but still doesn't feel too great. So with that in mind, cards like Boseiju, cards like Cultivate, I think they'd rather just be mana dorks, because those mana dorks, even if they don't have reach, have a chance, like Birds of Paradise, to deal damage. Now, obviously, Birds of Paradise is the best of the bunch, but they do have a chance to deal damage, and when they do that, you'll draw a card. So I would rather those be smaller creatures in general. Okay, last few things I want to point out, just all around. Bull of Nylea. I don't understand why this is here. I've read it like a bunch of times, and I just don't. I used to play this card in Commander, and it does have utility, don't get me wrong, but it is a huge mana sink in a deck that you do not have tons of mana in, because you're always proactively building your board. So I don't really see why this is here. I think your 3-drop slot is already the highest slot. I think we should cut a few of them if we can. Likewise, Kasili Ambusher is unfortunately a rather bad card, even in Reach Tribal. So his whole thing is that if an opponent attacks you and you control a forest and a plains, you get to play this for free and then play it at instant speed. The idea being is that you can immediately then block whatever creature, is attacking you. But here's the thing with Commander. There's just a very, very short window that this card is good in, and that would be in the first 2 turns. If you could use Windswept Heath to grab Temple Guarded or Savannah right at the start, that's just really, really good. You have Kasili Ambusher. Immediately you get to flash this in, block, I don't know, any number of 2 toughness or less creatures, and you feel rather good about it. Someone attacks you with a, Carrion Feeder or, Esper Sentinel just to get the damage through. Well, there you go. You've gotten a way to stop them. But very quickly, this card gets outclassed immediately. Namely because the creatures that you're going to be attacked with, really, in Commander, they go up rather quickly. So Kasili Ambusher becomes like a non-blocker very fast. But then you say Curse, that doesn't matter. We still get a free creature that's a 2/3. And that's the other problem is, do you though, right? ignoring the fact that there's going to be situations where you won't have both a forest and a plains, mainly because you're using cards such as, let's see, we have less than we thought maybe. I was looking for, yeah, Sun Petal Grove or the like you have 3 forests in Sun Petal Grove, is not going to get Quasili Pride Mage out. Where are you? I just saw you. My goodness, you've disappeared from my life. There you Ambusher. And I said Pride Mage. I meant Ambusher. Not only is that not going to allow this card to go out, it's worth considering that you have to be attacked. And I know this sounds dumb, but there are, you know, situations where you're not going to get attacked for several rounds, right? Where either players are just kind of too scared of the rest of your creatures. Remember, your creatures all untap if you have your commander out, so you do have a formidable defense. Or your opponents just have better opponents to attack, or, and this is just worth considering, either by board clear or by something else, the board is just not really filled with attackers. People are, you know, playing non-creature spells, and you're not getting attacked. All of this leads me to say is if you have to pay 3 mana for this creature, something has gone horribly wrong. And I'm going to suggest that more than often, you will have to pay 3 for this creature. So I really don't like it. I think that's worth considering. All right, I'm going to end there on my cuts. There's a few more cards here and there that I probably would like to cut, but I think that's enough for now. I did want to take a note that I really love Wilson here. I think Wilson is very, very strong, and very, very funny that we get to play him. All right. So let's look into my additions, if I have them nearby. All right, so let's go to my 1 reach creature. And my 1 reach creature is Skylasher. It's just a card I like. That's really it. I find in certain situations, it's rather good. It can pressure blue players really, really well, where you don't need to worry about its power. I think you have the other card that is similar, but I don't know if that has hexproof. Where is it? Our Spore. So this one has hexproof. Sporeweb Weaver has hexproof from blue, but Skylasher having protection from blue is just a lot more relevant against certain decks. This can wall off certain commanders, whether they have flying or not. This can go and attack blue planeswalkers on blue boards really, really well. I think it's just rather good. Having protection from an entire color and having a natural kind of can't be countered away around that color in general is generally, and especially popular colors, is really good in medium power decks, especially because this doesn't have much of an opportunity cost, right? It has reach, it's already on theme, it's relevant against, you know, a lot of different decks that run blue, and at worst, it's just a flash attacker against other decks, is rather good. I do really like it. I think it's worth considering as one of your 2 mana cards. Also, once again, worth considering that more of those, every creature that is lower mana than your commander has a chance, is likely to attack on your with your commander out, drawing you a card, especially when the boards are rather clear. So rather like Skylasher. Then this one doesn't have reach, but I thought it was notably absent. Welcoming Vampire is kind of interesting to me because, once again, the majority of our creatures tend to have lower power. Though, that being said, looking around, I don't know if that's universally the case. There's definitely some bigger creatures, but we do have quite a few, and depending on the final numbers, it might be worth to play the Vampire. It also obviously works really well with cards like Sporeweb Weaver or Arachnogenesis, which will trigger it for sure as well. Just something to consider, just a little extra card draw. It's something your deck is rather good at, and I like being on theme with it. Finally, with flying, Welcoming Vampire is just really good at triggering our commander's ability to draw. Okay. Let's see what I want to do for the last few. Okay, so for the last few, what I wanted to suggest, and I said this at the start, is one of the powers of this deck that it has such a nice variety of types of threats. Like, it has a really good variety of instants. It has, you know, a lot of good variety in creatures. The fact that we get to use assault formation is rather good. Like, we have different ways to make our creatures dangerous. The fact that we have so many cards that enable our creatures on damage to draw us cards, once again, really powerful. So I want to stay within the theme, and I've got two different directions I want to do with that. And the first one is double strike. And I'm going to offer you two options. True Conviction, of course, is kind of the, premier double strike in white, where it just gives all your creatures double strike. The lifelink is fine. You're not too worried about that. It's mainly the double strike you're casting for this card. It's really powerful. It doesn't change whether or not your creatures are unblocked because their power doesn't change, but all of a sudden when you attack with a 1/3, when its toughness does damage, that's 6 damage out of that one creature, which is really good. However, 6 mana is quite a bit, so alternatively, I could also suggest Duelist's Heritage. Duelist's Heritage is a little clunkier because you have to pick one creature per attack. But of course, it has very much so the benefit that you get to pick your opponent's creatures, which allows you to play political, but also incidentally do a lot of damage. There's a lot of cards that I talk about when their power is somewhat hard to track. If you play this card and you're like, I'm not sure if I like it, just keep track of how much extra damage it does. Just every time your opponents attack, tell them, hey, well, first of all, you know where they're attacking, because this is when the creature has already declared its attack. Pick one of them, give it double strike. And then, on a piece of paper, just note how much extra damage it does because of that. And do that for one game and see, or like a few games probably to get a good average, but see how much damage it does. I think you'll be impressed. It's nowhere as good as True Conviction, but it's half the mana, and it lets you play political, so one of the two I do really like here. Now, the other one I really do like is, the other direction I should say, is +1/+1 counters. Now, there's a few ways to do this. One of the fears are, I'm preemptively putting this out here, but one of the fears of +1/+1 counters is that, let's look at the cards first and then I'll talk about it. So Invasion of Gobekon is just a really good card. You're really happy with it. You get to hurt someone's hand. You can then immediately flip it with the right board, and from that point on, you have a growing board and indestructibility and hexproof that you can sacrifice this for. It's just a really good card. I think it should go in here for sure. Something else on the bigger end is Cathar's Crusade. I don't usually like recommending this card because it is kind of a headache to resolve its triggers, but I think it belongs here quite a bit. So let me go back to what I was going to say. So the tension of +1/+1 counters in this deck is that as your creatures grow, the chance of them being unblockable with reach goes away, right? Once your creature is the biggest creature in power, it no longer can be unblockable with Skulk, it's just attacking. And though that feels like a nombo, what I'm going to suggest is this is actually something you want in the long run. Because at a certain point, your army is going to get big enough that you actually do want them to start blocking. Because unless you have like E-Honda or very specific kind of assault formation hands, it is hard for your deck to immediately take down an opponent with sheer damage because your creatures are rather low power. So at a certain point, you do need to beef them up. And you might say, well, Cursed, if they're all like 6 power, if I have like 8 6-power creatures, my opponents can block them. Yeah, but then you have 8 6-power creatures, right? Like, I think that's fine. I think that's a fine trade any time of the day, right? At a certain point, when your opponents have to be forced into blocking, you are generally winning the game at that point. So I would recommend getting into sneaking in the damage early as much as you can to draw cards, and then in the late game, start beefing up your team so that you can start taking out multiple players a turn or taking out a player with only a few attackers, which I think Cathar's Crusade is really good. Another card that's like this, or what I should say is, I have 2 cards here that kind of fight in the other way, that they want to keep, they're working to keep that reach, that Skulk advantage. One of them is Evolutionary Escalation. This is a card that puts 3+1/+1 tokens on one of counters, sorry, on one of your creatures, as long as you can also put them on one of your opponent's creatures. Now, there's two things I really like about that. One, the ability to add 6 power to the board every turn is rather good. Now, it's not all your power, but it's still rather good because you can kind of make deals, much like Duelist Heritage, to point that power at something else. You could just say, hey, if you want this, you have to treat it like a goad, that for the next turn, that creature can't attack me. And I think a lot of people would take that deal. But the other thing, and the kind of genius of this, is imagine I've got like a 3/4 reach creature, and you have a 4/4 beast or whatever. As long as I keep targeting both those cards with Evolutionary Escalation, the beast can never block the reach creature, because the reach creature will always have less power than the beast. And at a certain point, it won't matter because you're attacking unblockable with like 9 damage, and then it becomes a real problem for the beast, the player with the beast, right? And so Evolutionary Acceleration is Escalation, is really cool for this, to kind of mess up that math and ensure some very powerful attacks against opponents who can no longer block. And I also have another way to do this, and this is Curse of Predation. Now, I think Curse of Predation is a really good card. I think it is stupidly good, and it's just hard to kind of gauge it, and so it doesn't see play. As long as you are the player with the most creatures, Curse of Predation is incredibly powerful. It also marks a player for to be defeated really quickly, because it becomes an arms race. As soon as you play Curse of Predation and attack that player with like 4 or 5 creatures, your opponents need to either get rid of your board or get rid of the curse, or stay in the game and attack that player too. So all of a sudden that player is taking multiple attacks as an escalation, an arms war is happening right outside their battlefield, and it's just a really scary place to be. But the other reason I really like it is, just like Evolutionary Escalation, is that Curse of Predation, lots of shins here, also evenly grows the board turn by turn. So if your reach creatures have the lowest power and you attack with all your creatures and your next opponent attacks with all their creatures, well, your reach creatures still technically have the lowest power, right? And because of that, it allows you to stay in that zone where your creatures are unblockable for longer while keeping, gaining that power advantage. So I do really like that. I just noticed this when I was looking for curses. Curse of Clinging Webs, you can cast on a player to just get spiders as their creatures die. I've never seen this. People need to be playing this against aristocrat decks and other general aggro decks. This card is much better if you it's better than I thought it was on the first read, and I think it's rather good. Especially if you know your meta. If there's at least chances of one aggro player or at least one aristocrat player per pod, which I think is rather high, or one tribal player as well. It doesn't even need to be an aggro player. Curse of Clinging Webs is really good here. It can let you play around board clears. It can let you just, be an aggressive player and, reap the rewards of your opponents having to deal with the aggro player. It's kind of a selfish card, but it is very much so a powerful card. All right, and those are my suggestions. Coming to an end, I think this is a really good start of Reach Tribal. As said before, I think we should be cutting a majority of the higher end to kind of slim that down and take a look so that we can kind of play only the strongest cards at the top. There's a few cards here and there that I don't particularly love, Bow of Nylea, Cassilia Ambusher, for example. And I do believe that we can take out Cultivate and Boseiju for mana dorks of any kind, where you will benefit there quite a bit. Then in terms of additions, Expel and Fel can replace, one of those can replace Dust to Dawn. Skylasher, I think, is good fun. Welcoming Vampires, fine. Definitely play Invasion of Gobakon. Definitely play either True Conviction or Duelist Heritage. And I would very much so consider playing either Curse of Predation or Curse of Clinging Webs, maybe even both. Those are my suggestions. Thank you so much for sending in the deck, Lexa. I do appreciate it. And I'm really excited to see another draft of this. I think there's quite a bit of direction we can put into the deck. I guess I forgot I said I would talk about power level. If we want to increase power level of this deck, we do have to start removing reach creatures and take more advantage of just Fierce Punch. But the thing is, what I do like about this deck, there are rather a high number of reach creatures that are good at any level of power. For example, Endurance here is just really, really good, you know, generally in any power level, especially as we get higher, and it is a reach creature, which I do rather like. Likewise, things like Kodama of the West Tree, really, really good, despite it being just, you know, in a lot of ways, a cute reach creature for some people. And I like that. I think that gives the deck a lot of, oh God, I'm going to make the joke again. It gives the deck a lot of reach, and I do really like that. But as we improve the deck, we're probably going to we would probably start taking out some of the cuter reach creatures and just putting in some generically more powerful green and white cards, from Dreadeth Magistrate to, like, probably Thalia would be really good here, that kind of direction. But I leave that up to you. The nice thing of Dhalsim is that we have such a wide net to throw of what power level we want for the deck. If you would like to send me another draft of this deck, you can, or any deck, you can find a link in the video description to do so. And if you would like Lexa, to bring your deck list to the next deck, like front of the queue, next deck I work on, there's a link there as well. And as always, if you'd like, comment, subscribe, I would be very, very grateful. I'm really excited to see more of Dhalsim. I'm really excited to see more of the, what did we call them? Outer Universe? The Worlds Beyond. Universes Beyond? That's the one. You know, the other IPs and such. The Doctor Who cards are really interesting, and I do hope they all get Universes Within cards because I do prefer that, but I'm excited to see more. All right, good luck.